Hello and welcome to another episode of For Zion's Sake, the CUFI UK podcast. My name is Alex, and you'll notice, or if you're watching, you'll notice that Alistair is away this week, and so I'm joined by Des Starrett, the Executive Director of Christians United for Israel here in the UK. So welcome,
Great.
Des.
Well, thanks for having me. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, so we've got a lot to discuss this week. It's been quite busy in terms of what's happening in Israel with the Jenin sort of operation that's been going on, and a lot of misinformation out there in the media. But we actually want to start on a positive, and that's the success we've had in Parliament this week as an organisation and as pro-Israel supporters. And there's been a number of groups involved in, campaigning to get this pushed through. But just so our listeners know, it was basically an anti-boycott bill that was put through. It was called the Economic Activity of Public Bodies in Overseas Matters Bill. But technically speaking, it was to stop local councils from being able to boycott Israel and to choose a different path to what the government's foreign policy is.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so they were sort of choosing their own foreign policy over and above the government, basically.
Yeah, exactly. And we obviously felt that was wrong. With the councils, it put a lot of their constituents in problems if they started to boycott. We also know from mine and Alistair's discussion last week, Alistair gave an example of a local councilman who refused to meet a British citizen because he had dual Israel nationality. And he saw his ability to boycott Israel as his ability to basically boycott a British citizen, which I thought was outrageous. But yeah, so it passed in Parliament. This is the second reading of the bill, and it passed with 268 votes in favour and 70 votes against. What's notable there is that Labour actually not boycotted, but they abstained from voting because they wanted to have an amendment which would have sort of watered down the bill a little bit. It got rejected by the rest of Parliament, and so as a kind of, not as a protest, but they kind of didn't want to support the bill because it wasn't what they wanted, but they didn't want to say no to the bill because they did actually, for the most part, support it going through.
With it,
So Keir Starmer actually wanted it to go through.
Yeah.
But when you look at the breakdown of it, there were no Labour MPs who actually voted in favour of it. The only people who voted in favour were the Conservatives, the DUP, and the Reclaim Party. And those who voted against were the SNP, Liberal Democrats, Green Party, about 10 Labour MPs, 2 or 3 Conservative MPs who sort of rebelled against the government, and a number of independents, including Jeremy Corbyn, as you would expect. So I thought that was a great result.
It was something CUFI has been campaigning for a long time, but this was getting to a point where we'd really need to see it over the line, so we're really pleased it's happened. It's on the back of the fact that we've just developed a new system for campaigning. Our previous system wasn't available to us from the beginning of the year, so we've invested quite heavily in a new system, and that new system seems to be working very well because thousands of emails were sent to our MPs all across the country. And that's the great thing about CUFI being a sort of national organisation. We literally have constituents all around the country, so every MP gets a letter, providing our campaign. Our campaigns are supported by our supporters, which they are. Yeah, and we really thank them for that.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, one thing we do as CUFI is we provide the vehicle for our supporters to actually write to their MP, but as you said, it's down to our supporters to do the work in terms of writing. And thankfully, many people wrote to their MPs and helped to, really put pressure on to politicians to support this bill. And, we've seen success now.
Yeah. And that vehicle, as you refer to it, has actually been developed by CUFI, along with some software developers, obviously, some techies. And I say we've paid quite a bit for it, but we've made that system available to others too. Yeah. And so that they can use the system, because basically we're all trying to, support Israel in the best way we can. Yeah. And so we're one of the larger organisations involved, but there are other smaller ones who need the system as well. So,
yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
it all helps.
Yeah, and so if anyone wants to support what we're doing, because this obviously has a financial cost to it, we offer it free to our supporters to use as a way of campaigning on behalf of Israel. So if anyone does want to support the work we're doing, you can donate going to www.cufi.org.uk/donate, and that really does help support the work that we're doing. And thank you everyone for campaigning.
Yeah, but I say it's special request at this time, because having invested quite a bit in the system, our funds are quite low. So we would love to see it top back up again for the other campaigning that we're doing. Yeah. And talking about that, of course, we still have an ongoing campaign with the IRGC. And so if you haven't yet sent sent your vote, so to speak, and sent your email to your MP, then please do so. Just go onto our website and look for the IRGC.
Yeah, and I think if you go to cufi.org.uk/campaigns, that will show you the latest campaigns. And these campaigns, there'll be new campaigns every month. The ongoing one, as you said, is the IRGC. We want the UK to ban the IRGC, the Iranian militant group, because they are carrying out illegal activities in the UK, and we want the UK to outlaw them, just as they've outlawed Palestinian Islamic Jihad, Hezbollah, other Iranian proxies. They now need to tackle the big one.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So that was positive news with the campaign. But now we're going to move on to a bit more of a challenging topic, and that is Jenin. And this week, the Israel Defense Forces, the IDF, carried out a military operation in Jenin, and they went into the Jenin camp. Just so people understand, Jenin is a Palestinian city in Samaria, the north of the West Bank, and it's people maybe get a bit confused. They think it's the whole thing is a refugee camp. Well, it's not. It is a full-fledged city with schools, universities, hospitals, all the rest of it, businesses. It's a sort of a thriving economy, but within that there is an area which they call the Jenin camp, or the refugee camp, which is basically a lawless area of the city, a small 0.4 kilometer area, which is under the control of terrorists, basically. The Palestinian Islamic Jihad and other terror groups known as the Jenin battalions or the Jenin brigades, they control the refugee camp. The Palestinian Authority controls Jenin as a whole, but they don't really have any say over the camp itself.
No, but it's worth noting that they're responsible for Jenin.
Yes,
they should be taking control of what's happening there.
Exactly. Yeah, and that's a very important point, because this week the Palestinian Authority showed themselves to be not only sort of, like you're saying, they're incompetent in terms of taking care of this terror threat, but they've actually come out in favour of the terrorists on numerous occasions. Palestinian leaders within, telling their group they support the Jenin terrorists. Hussam Zomlot, the Palestinian envoy to the UK, basically said, they have a right to resist. They don't condemn what they're doing. They condemn Israel for, all these alleged atrocities, which is just not true. And you're right, the Palestinian Authority is complicit in this. They're not controlling the situation. And so Israel has to take action. And the reason why is because this camp is one of the main places where terrorists have come from when they've been carrying out attacks against Israelis, mainly civilians, over the last 12 to 18 months. And so the terrorists either come from there, as in they're born and bred there, or they were trained there, because there's a lot of training facilities, a lot of terrorists there. And the other thing is, the camp especially in Jenin, has been used to hide people. So there's been attacks that have happened in, for example, Huwara, where there were two brothers who were shot dead. The terrorists who killed those two brothers then fled to Jenin and were hidden by the terrorists. And then Israel had to go in, this was weeks ago, to arrest those terrorists.
Yeah. Of course, and in that attack, Israel was met with fierce opposition, weren't they? Exactly. And not just sort of firing, but it was actually explosive devices and all sorts of things.
Yeah, dozens of them. There's videos of Jeeps driving through, the street, and literally explosions going off as they're going through. And the terrorists, they don't care whether, they don't care if they damage a house or, any other civilians around. So they're just trying to destroy these armored vehicles coming through.
Right. So these are not innocent Palestinians with stones, as often referred to.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I think it's really important to explain that Israel went in there with the intention of arresting people. There's been some accusations that they went in there. For example, Hussam Zomlot, he said they're trying to wipe out Jenin and destroy it. Not at all. They went in there to arrest. They arrested over 150 Palestinian terrorists or suspected terrorists. And in the conflict they had, they killed around a dozen people, and it could be up to like 20. The numbers are still not, finalized. But Israel is very confident that every single one of them was a terrorist or a militant involved in activity. And it should be noted that there are a number of children that were killed during this conflict, but every single one of those children is either pictured with a gun, filmed firing a gun, or filmed carrying an explosive device. So every single one of those children was involved in terrorist activity, and the fault of that child being involved is not Israel's, it's the terrorists. And so I wrote an article this week where the international community has come out blaming Israel for killing children. But by blaming Israel, there's three things they get wrong. First of all, it smears Israel for being child murderers, which they're not. It is, even though it's obviously under international law, you're meant to try and protect children, even if they are militants. The IDF do not know that the 17-year-old boy who's 6 foot tall, holding a machine gun firing at them is a little boy. They don't know he's a child. They know he's a threat to them, and they're going to deal with that threat. And so it's not Israel's fault if that child dies. It's the terrorist's fault for recruiting him. So second of all, it scapegoats the terrorists. When the UN and so forth blame Israel for killing children, it scapegoats the terrorists and takes the blame away from them, when actually they are the ones committing the crime. They're the ones in breach of human rights law and in breach of international law. And third of all, it actually is a failing on the international community to protect children, because they are not then following their own laws. The international law they bash Israel with all the time, they never use it against the terrorists. And actually they're failing the children who are being abused and being used and being sent into combat. But unfortunately, this is something we see with, Palestinian terrorism. It's what we see with Islamist terrorism. ISIS, for example. We were speaking about this the other day, weren't we? Where ISIS sent in a battalion of 300 children against Syrian forces, and all 300 children were killed. And they were called the Cubs of the Caliphate or something like that. And in a war where 480 soldiers died, 300 of those soldiers were children. So this is actually like an ISIS tactic, a radical Islamist tactic, where they brainwash children, raise them up in terror, and send them into battle, and they get killed and slaughtered. And in the instance with the Cubs of the Caliphate, the world understood this was a war crime from ISIS. But when the Palestinians do it,
it's never referred to as war.
Yeah.
In fact, they're never even referred to as terrorists. They're referred to as children.
Yeah.
Which instantly makes it sound like Israel is creating these atrocities. But actually, that's not the case at all. You're absolutely right. I mean, it's more than just the responsibility of the terrorists. It's actually the responsibility of the Palestinian leadership. For too many years, they have maintained this status quo, whereby they keep their own people in poverty. And those people then get so frustrated, they feel that there's no other alternative but violence. And that's what they're trained to do. They're encouraged to do. The Palestinian Authority will pay them to do that. And if they get killed, then their families will get paid. It's a pay-to-slay policy that the Palestinians have that doesn't help this situation. And the world media are just as much at fault, because they continue the charade. They refer to these poor people as children. and actually these are trained terrorists. Okay, albeit young, and that's really sad from our perspective. But actually they've been trained, they've been indoctrinated from their very early days. They walk down streets named after terrorists. They honour terrorists. Why would you expect any different? I pulled out a quote actually because I knew we were going to talk about this, and it's from Golda Meir, and she was the Prime Minister of Israel during 1969 to 1974. So that's 50 years ago, And her quote back then was, "We can forgive the Arabs for killing our children. We cannot forgive them for forcing us to kill their children. We will only have peace with the Arabs when they love their children more than they hate us." And you think to yourself, nothing has changed. 50 years of conflict, and the Palestinian leadership are still maintaining the same status quo that they had back then. It's sad, really. And the international community fall for it every time and just pay them billions of dollars, which is usually corrupt usage by the leadership. And the poor, relatively poor people of the Palestinian territories do not get any of that, and they suffer. And they say they're frustrated. They're frustrated with their leadership. And in fact, this group of youngsters in Jenin are actually not under the control of the Palestinian Authority because they just reject them. Because they actually feel that the Palestinian Authority is a waste of space. And if anything needs to happen to change the situation, they need to take to the streets themselves. And that's what they're doing. And Israel's faced with trying to sort that situation out. They don't want to go in there and kill children. No, that's not what they intended to do. They go in there and try and protect people. But they have to take out the terrorists. And they have to take out the terrorist infrastructure, the bomb-making factories, and all of the weapons and so on that they've probably captured during this thing. I mean, these are massive supplies of weapons, probably coming from funding from Iran. And the world is just blaming Israel for all of it. It's crazy.
I know. And, like you said, with the quote from Golda Meir, she says, "We can forgive them for killing our children." Like, bearing in mind, a lot of these terrorists from Jenin who attacked Israelis killed children. And yet the world is silent when Israeli children die, but it kicks up a storm when Palestinian children die. Even if the Israeli children are innocent civilians, literally stood at a bus stop and getting run down. When the Palestinian children are, brainwashed Islamists who are carrying weapons and shooting at Israelis. It's like there's such a, the lies become truth, the truth become lie. It is.
And I say the media, sadly, we had this discussion last night, by Messenger, but the media tends to tone it down so much to the point where they whitewash all these horrific things that are going on. And, really, we need to be able to see through that. And our government needs to speak out against it. And the media needs to be honest.
Yeah, exactly.
Honest reporting.
And that is one of the issues because, for example, the BBC, they this week were one of those media organisations spreading some misinformation and smearing Israel. But they claim that they're always coming from what the UN says. And so it's like, I mean, we know they're not because they've got sort of their own biases and things as well, and they get things wrong. They don't follow.
Let's not forget the UN is incredibly biased against Israel as well.
That's the thing. And it's like, but they all sort of help each other in basically lying and spreading misinformation. And these are meant to be the organisations we trust to tell the truth, but actually, too many times it's not happening. So, for example, this week with the BBC, they were forced to apologise because one of their presenters basically said that Israel is happy to kill children. And this was an interview on the BBC with Naftali Bennett, who was the former Prime Minister of Israel. And the presenter was Anjana Gadgil, and she's subsequently, the BBC has apologised. She's actually deleted her Twitter account and things like that because there was quite a fierce backlash against her because basically she was spreading a blood libel against Israel. In another interview I heard, the BBC presenter, it was the BBC World at 1. I'm not sure who the presenter was, but she was sort of questioning the Israeli commander of the operation, and she was saying, is your aim to kill is your aim just basically to kill people, or is it to arrest people? Well, the evidence is there. Like, Israel arrested far, far more people than they killed. But she, under her breath, said, "So you're trying to kill people?" Like, she said it, and I was just like, "That's such a bias. Like, that's not a professional."
I'm sure Israel would prefer to arrest these people and get some information from them and understand, some of the backstory. But if you're faced with a submachine gun or a terrorist with a submachine gun and a bomb making, bomb belt, or you have no choice but to shoot them.
Yeah, exactly.
We would do the same here, and our police would do exactly the same.
Yeah,
you have to eliminate them if they're attacking you.
Yeah, and that's the thing. It's unfortunate, but that's the reality.
Yeah, that's right.
And I mean, there was a situation where, well, this is sort of slightly an aside, but the response to all of this from the Palestinians has been terror attacks against Israeli civilians. And so one of the attacks was actually a 14-year-old, I think it was a 14-year-old Palestinian boy who grabbed a knife and stabbed someone in the back. Well, he wasn't shot dead. He was arrested, and he was filmed. He was basically crying, and the police were sort of arresting him and things. But this is the thing: like, Israel isn't just shooting dead this child because, like, he was in the middle of a terrorist attack. Yeah. They managed to disarm him and arrest him. So they try to arrest as much as they can when they can. The problem is they're dealing with life or death situations. If you shoot, I mean, there's literally videos where you see someone get shot in the leg and they stand up and carry on their attack. It's hard to actually disable someone who's full of adrenaline, full of rage, got a weapon in hand. And especially when you've got oftentimes civilians having to deal with these situations. For example, there was a car ramming in Tel Aviv. And so there was this was a Palestinian. I'm not sure if he was linked to a terror group, but he, basically it was said from Palestinian Islamic Jihad that this was in response to the Jenin raid. And he ploughed his vehicle into multiple people, all civilians. There's a 46-year-old woman who was really injured from it. There was a woman who was pregnant who lost her baby. Yes. Yeah, and so it's like a horrific attack. In my opinion, that's murder. And so the situation with him is the video footage shows him crashing his car into a bus stop, basically jumping out of the vehicle with a knife, and he stabs one gentleman who I think he gets sort of stabbed under his arm and then pushes him away, and then the guy moves on to another person. Anyway, a civilian comes out with a gun, shoots him dead. People condemning, saying, why didn't they try and stop him? Well, you're a civilian. You're a civilian there. Like, you're not trained for this situation. There's no way you're going to let this guy continue, if you're armed with a weapon. And I think people just sort of live in a bit of a, la la land sort of thing when they deal with these things.
Yeah. And I mean, the sad thing is that whereas the Israelis do try and protect life, many of the sort of radical Palestinians are all about death.
Yeah.
For them, death is martyrdom.
Yeah.
Death is success.
Yeah.
But death of the opposition, the Israelis, for example, is definitely what they're aiming for. And but they've been trained that way. They've been told that from early days.
Yeah.
And if you train up a child in the way he will go, he won't depart from it.
Yeah.
And they are literally, from the earliest days, are trained in this hatred of Israel, and the fact that it's okay to kill Israelis, to kill Jews.
That's what they're taught, unfortunately.
Of Jewish people. So it has to stop.
Yeah.
But I mean, I'd say, I don't know what the answer is, because Golda Meir 50 years ago was saying exactly the same thing, and nothing really has changed.
Yeah. Well, I think, I mean, to sort of expand upon Golda Meir's thing, maybe it's, if the Palestinians are not able to fix this on their own, maybe it's up to the international community. If the international community loved Israeli children as much as they love Palestinian children, maybe they would then take the action to put pressure on the Palestinians and stop them from doing this. The international community dealt with ISIS. It dealt with radical Islamic terrorism in many different ways. Obviously, it hasn't eradicated all those things, and there's still lots of problems. But it's like, I'm sure there is a way of dealing with this. Ultimately, from my perspective, I think it probably is more of there's a spiritual side of things. I think, as a Christian, I believe the only answer is Jesus, that kind of thing. But you'd hope that there would be a practical measure that the international community could do to actually help resolve this situation. But unfortunately, I don't think they're willing to do that. And I'm not sure why exactly. So.
Well, it serves their purpose, I guess, to continue the facade.
Yeah, it's sad. So with some of the information that has been spread, misinformation out there, unfortunately, we saw even in Parliament some of the rhetoric of the Palestinians coming out. So, for example, Jeremy Corbyn, when he was speaking in Parliament, he said that there's no way for Israel to enter that place and show proportional force sort of thing. And as a result, innocent civilians have died. And the reality is no civilian has died on the Palestinian side. And I think it's really important we counter this narrative. There was also some false accusations that Israel was blocking ambulances from going in, that they were tearing up the roads in order to make life misery for the Palestinians, that they, all the 4,000 Palestinians evacuated, and this was Israel forcing, ethnic cleansing, all this stuff. They made all these false allegations, whereas actually the reality is a lot different. So, for example, with the road situation, the Israelis were forced to clear the roads, literally dig up portion of road where they had intelligence that there were IEDs. Is it IEDs? Is that the right word? Improvised explosive devices, exactly. IED, hidden under there. And the reason why they dug up the road was to basically stop their forces being killed or injured. And so they dug up the roads, and there's video footage actually of them then making the road at least clear enough for a vehicle to drive on, and allowing several ambulances through. So they weren't actually, digging up the road to cause misery for the Palestinians. They were actually protecting, because ultimately that IED could have gone off under an ambulance.
And of course, a week or so ago, when they did go into Jenin, that's exactly what happened.
Yeah,
it went off under an armed vehicle.
Yeah,
and blew the vehicle, and the occupants were.
Yeah, the occupants were injured. I think eight. A mixture of soldiers and police were injured. The vehicle was then disabled. The IDF then had to call in an Apache to give support to get, because they were under heavy fire. I think that's one thing people may not realize from the reports. This isn't
a peaceful street in downtown Jerusalem.
It's a war zone basically. And one thing as well with the Palestinians is about in April, I think it was, they released, Palestinian Islamic Jihad released this image of the gates of the Jenin camp, and they're all there in military garb, all wearing M16s. And they said, you cannot enter here. That's what they said as a threat. Anyway, Israel then, this week, took a picture with all the IDF outside that same gate saying, yes, we did. That kind of taunting them. But anyway, and so this week again, after Israel had left, so when Israel's in there doing the operations, there's no military gear. You don't see a Palestinian wearing a balaclava and their military colours, because they want to blend in with the crowd.
Yeah, dressed as civilians.
Yeah, exactly. So they dress as civilians, but they'll maybe have weapons on them. And there's video footage showing these people dressed as civilians, holding machine guns, firing machine guns, and behind them is 10 civilians, 10 people there. So when Israel's having to shoot back at these terrorists, there are civilians as human shields, basically.
Exactly. Yeah.
And unfortunately, some of those civilians have been injured, and Israel has admitted that some civilians were injured. None of them have been killed. But who is at fault at that? Is it Israel? If you're a soldier there being shot at and you have to neutralize the threat. Yeah. And it's so the fault again is a war crime to use civilians as human shields. But going back to that, when Israel then left Jenin camp, there was then a video that was put out last night of literally hundreds of Palestinian Islamic Jihad gunmen, all dressed in their balaclavas, walking through the streets. They're getting it's almost like a parade. The people in the camp are celebrating their return, return. They were there the whole time.
They would probably see it as a success.
Yes, exactly. They're celebrating it as a victory. Unfortunately, there was an Israeli soldier who was killed as they were leaving. He was shot in the head. There is some thought that he might have actually been hit by friendly fire, but there's not an understanding yet of what happened. But that's really sad.
That's the thing. In any sort of conflict situation like that, there is the risk that there's going to be casualties from people who are not involved in the conflict. But if you're there, then that's understandably why it's going to happen. If you've got children out on the streets supporting the terrorists, they are at risk. And it's sad when it happens, but it does happen from time to time. If you have ambulance people going in to into a fight between machine guns, on two sides, somebody potentially in that ambulance could get killed.
Exactly.
So Israel has to try and control the situation to a certain extent, and the international community, and especially Jeremy Corbyn and the likes, should recognise that. These are not normal situations. This is not a walk in the park situation. Israel does not want to be there. They have to go in these situations to try and bring some control and try and reduce the threat that they're experiencing. I mean, there's been quite a few Israelis who've been killed by terrorists from this region. They've had their military injured as a result of trying to arrest people. These are war-torn situations, and you can't expect that everything to go smoothly in those situations. It's a risk.
Exactly. And yet, despite it being one of the most densely populated sort of war zones, Israel is extremely careful and extremely effective. I mean, like when if you're talking about morality of conflict and things, I mean, if this was the NATO, there would be so many more civilian casualties. Like it would.
Yeah, if you look at any other conflicts around the world, I mean, you look at what's happening in Ukraine at the moment. Thousands of innocent civilians are being sort of targeted. And hardly anything is said about it. And yet, every time Israel tries to protect innocent civilians, and sadly some are injured, they get blamed for it. And yet, when you look at the situation on the ground, it's a miracle that more weren't killed.
Exactly.
It really is. And I mean, you've got to show a lot of respect for the IDF because they go into these situations, they're trying to minimize loss, that not only their own lives but the lives of the sort of innocent bystanders. They do need to take out some terrorists from time to time, but they would prefer to arrest them and take them into custody. But that's not a choice when you're faced with a militiaman with but also dressed as a civilian hiding their weapons. I mean, it really is a difficult. You've got to admire the IDF. And these are young men and women too. They're supporting their country. They're standing up for Israel. They know they have to do it, but it's hard.
Exactly.
They don't want to kill children, as the BBC claim. There's no way that wants to happen, and they've not wanted to do that for the last 50 years. And if the Palestinian leadership would only step up, and if the international media and the international organisations stopped lying, basically, then we would see a change in the situation.
Exactly.
And people are responsible. And there's some organisations out there that need to recognise their responsibility and do what's right.
Exactly. And I think, the United Nations is a key one. Obviously, it's a amalgamation of 193 different countries. So if they are condemning something, it's shows there's a big problem. The UN chief this morning, it's come out that he claims Israel obviously, in quotes, obviously used excessive force in Jenin, and Israel has now asked him to make a retraction because the facts on the ground do not back up his false accusation. And this is the head of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres. And last week, me and Alistair were talking about how last week his office was thanking both Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad, two outlawed terror groups, thanking them for their input on a report about the safety of children. And the only time they mentioned the report, the only time they mentioned Hamas and PIJ was to thank them. So they didn't condemn them or anything like that, not condemning them for using child soldiers. And Hamas and PIJ have used child soldiers both between the ages of 15 and 18, which is a international human rights violation. But when it comes to children under the age of 15, that is a war crime. And so they've done both. They've done war crimes and also human rights violations. And so for the UN to completely ignore that, like the evidence that's there, and to thank them for their input on a report to help protect the rights of children, it just shows how absurd it's got.
United Nations Human Rights Council are sort of mostly people who don't follow human rights. So
exactly. People like I think the Iranian regime is on there. There's lots of different, some dictatorships that are abusing human rights are on the Human Rights Council, and then telling the rest of the world how to treat people. And it's disgraceful, really, because the way they are elected, I think, is through oftentimes it's through sort of secret votes. And so there's obviously some dealings going on between different countries to sort of elect these people, and then when they're on that board, they can effectively whitewash their own war crimes because they're on the board, and they can decide if there's one going against my country, a resolution against my country, nope, that one's not going to go to the vote, and they can dictate.
In any normal situation, that would be a conflict of interest. They shouldn't have the right to vote in that situation. But no, in the UN, they can veto it, override it, and so it's absurd.
It is absurd, Theatre of the absurd, as Netanyahu calls it. And another thing as well with the UN is they accused Israel of targeting hospitals and mosques. And actually, there's a video I saw where the targeting of the hospital was actually when Israeli jeeps actually drove through like the forecourt of the hospital. They just drove past it. There was no shooting. And inside that hospital were terrorists. And so actually the war crime was committed by the terrorists using a hospital, a civilian facility, as a base for operations. They were using it to protect themselves with human shields. And yet the UN condemned Israel simply for driving past it when there were terrorists actually inside who they didn't condemn. And so it just shows this sort of, it's a complete hypocrisy. And with that, I think when we also look at the United Nations, it's been called the epicenter of anti-Semitism, that sort of thing. Well, actually, one of the anti-Semitic points of the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism is holding Israel to a different standard that it holds to other countries. And actually, that's what we're seeing time and time again. Israel is held to a much higher standard. The UN doesn't hold that standard to most other countries, like NATO forces, for example, when dealing with terrorists in Iraq, Afghanistan, and other places, Syria, they weren't scrutinized to the way that Israel is scrutinized. And yet Israel is literally, I would argue that Israel is one of the most humane militaries in the world that does the most to protect civilians than any other in the world. And yet they are criticized by the UN more than all other countries combined. And it just doesn't make sense. So, but anyway, that's enough on Jenin and terror and things. I think it's important, though, that at the UN sometimes there is some positive that comes out. This week, actually, at the United Nations Security Council, there was a statement by France, Germany, and the UK. And so they have actually come out against Iran for the Iran deal. So have you got the information there on that one?
Yes.
Because they have basically told us what we've known for many years, which is that the Iranian regime is basically breaking all the rules when it comes to the JCPOA and the Iran deal.
Yeah, their statement sort of said that Iran has also been in violation of its nuclear commitments under the 2015 deal for 4 years. So and they've probably known that for 4 years, but for the last 4 years they've been pretending that Iran is trying to comply. Yes. Yeah.
And I think, what was the percentage that they've gone over? It's like, is it 21 times? They've got 21 times more nuclear material than they should have, or something. Is that?
It was something like that. It was, but according to the Iran, it was unintended fluctuations.
All right. Okay. Of course.
Yes, that made them that much over.
Yeah. Yeah, of course it was. My finger slipped and I pushed the button and it made so much more nuclear material than I expected. Yeah.
France, Germany and the UK said Iran also continues to develop and improve ballistic missile capabilities of delivering nuclear weapons. So it's a twofold thing. It's not just the nuclear sort of development, but it's the actual rockets as well that they're going to use. So they have intentions that are not in purely just generating energy.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, that's the thing. Iran already has the capability to produce nuclear energy for its civilian population. It can use those nuclear reactors to provide, electricity to homes. It does not need to go any further than, I think, about 3.9% or 4% or something like that. And it's now up to 60% or whatever it is. They've produced far more in quantity. I think the 21 times is the actual quantity of what they've produced, not the sort of the weapons grade uranium sort of thing. But anyway, they're clearly in violation. 4 years in violation, as they said. Iran has said, they want to wipe Israel off the face of the earth. The UK now and France and Germany are finally admitting and being open and honest about it, saying they've produced lots more than they need. They've got a much higher grade uranium than they need. They've produced ballistic missiles with the intention of putting nuclear warheads on top of them, sort of thing. I mean, a few weeks ago, Iran announced that they could strike Israel with these hypersonic missiles and things. It's as clear as day that Iran is planning on carrying out a nuclear strike against Israel. Like, why is the UK not doing more to stop them?
Well, not just stop them, but I mean, the reality is this JCPOA deal has helped Iran do this. I mean, it's actually funded them with billions of dollars as a result of the deal, and which they've used for sort of terrorist activities around the globe. And added to that, they've obviously invested some of it in their nuclear capabilities, their rocket capabilities, and so on. And the Western world has been going along with this facade for 4 years. When Donald Trump pulled out of the deal, America was condemned. He was personally condemned for it. But the UK and Europe and so on have been trying to put that deal back together, and they're still trying to put that deal back together. Even though they know what Iran has been doing around the globe. Even though they know that they've been enriching uranium to a much higher level than is necessary. And they've been developing ballistic missiles as well, which potentially could target us. It's crazy, and we're funding them to do it. It's like, let's bury our head in the sands and just give all this money to Iran.
I know.
It's crazy.
I think it's interesting, though, that the UK, France and Germany have come out now saying this.
Great.
And I think one of the reasons why is probably because of the Ukraine-Russia situation. And actually, this statement came about during sort of heated arguments between USA, Russia and Ukraine at the UN Security Council, because obviously Russia has invaded Ukraine. NATO and the West are not happy with that. But with that, the sanctions placed on Russia have forced Russia to go eastward. So they've gone to Iran and they've gone to China in order to develop partnerships and trade links and things like that. Me and Asa have discussed previously about how there's links between chips manufactured in China, which are appearing on Iranian-made drones that are being used in Russia against Ukrainians. So there's like a big link there. And the thing is, I think now what's happening is the UK, Germany and France are finally waking up going, hang on, the ballistic missiles they've developed have been developed because Iran has obtained that from Russia and China because Iran is exporting its drone technology to Russia and China, and like they're doing secret deals and things. And the UK is probably now thinking, hang on, this isn't safe for us. This isn't good, but we told them this all along. We've been campaigning for this all along.
They've obviously not heard. But no. I mean, the Western governments are notorious for this. They look at things from a democratic point of view. They assume everybody's nice. And actually we're dealing with nations who are not nice and don't care in the same way that we care about things. And so our government needs to wake up to this. I mean, we can't trust them. The likes of Iran, that when they say something, you can't necessarily take it at face value. You have to go behind the scenes, and I say we've been supporting Iran for too long, and that has had a knock-on effect in terms of world terrorism, certainly around Israel. With Hezbollah, Hamas.
Even
Jihad.
Even Jenin.
Jenin, and exactly. They are well armed in Jenin. They didn't get that on their sort of their current salaries. It's not based on that at all. And so, the Western world needs to wake up to the fact that these facades, these lies almost. I mean, we want to see the best in people. I accept that. I understand that. but we need to have our eyes open
Yeah.
and be aware of what we're doing. And when we fund Iran, it's going to have a knock-on effect.
Yeah.
And we're, I mean, unfortunately, Ukraine is suffering some of the impact of that. And we've not been very clever in the way we've dealt with Iran in the past.
Yeah.
And now it's having an effect, on the people of Ukraine. So, these things have a knock-on effect. Honesty is the best policy in these things.
Yeah, and I think also courage, sort of standing up.
To
you have to stand up to evil, and actually, I think the Western diplomatic way, especially with like the UK, Europe, and so on, we're just weak. In my opinion, we're not standing up against evil. We're sort of trying to talk it out of evil. It's kind of like I don't know.
Trying to choose the best evil. Between two evils.
Yeah, exactly. And actually, we should stand up to all evil.
We should stand up to truth.
Yeah, stand up to truth. That's right. So I think to conclude the podcast for this week, getting on to a more positive note, and that is the fact that here at CUFI we believe in the truth of the Bible, and one of those truths is God's love for Israel, God's love for the Jewish people, his promise to Israel that they would inherit the land of Israel as an eternal inheritance. And this year obviously is the 75th anniversary.
Yes, Israel's 75th anniversary. A new book by Pastor John Hagee is available for any donation. So please donate and send in your donation, and we will send you this book. And there's some great sort of articles in it, but it just speaks about how God has really blessed Israel over these 75 years. How not just the formation of Israel being a miracle, but daily miracles that happen. And we need to continue to pray for Israel and pray for the peace of Jerusalem, pray for the peace of the whole land and the people of Israel and the Jewish people around the world, because they're often targets too. But it's amazing what God has done in 75 years. And if you visit Israel, you'll be amazed at what's been achieved in 75 years. And it's quite incredible that we're part of that. We're as CUFI, we actively encourage people to support Israel. And Israel needs our support in the international stage. We've been talking about that for the last period of time. But overall, we need to see that God has done some miracles there. God is not finished with Israel, as some claim, but God has got great plans for Israel. And the first 75 years have been great, but we've got more to go, and CUFI is going to be here for those.
Yeah, definitely. I agree. So if you do want to support the work of CUFI, and if you want to get hold of this book by Pastor John Hagee, please go to www.cufi.org.uk/donate75book. I think that is the link. It should come up on the screen and let you know the information on how you can donate to support and how to get hold of that book. This is only available for people in the UK with any donation that you make to CUFI, Christians United for Israel in the UK. But if you are from outside the UK, you can still donate, but unfortunately the book can only be sent to the UK at this time. And there might be a possibility of this book being available online at some point in the future as well. But right now we've got the physical books. We really do appreciate your support. Des, thank you for joining me today and
pleasure.
Helping out with Alistair being away this week. And I'm assuming, like in the future, if I'm away, you'll be having this with Alistair. Or you can join in and we'll have three of us here. It's great having you. Obviously, some important things to discuss. And here at CUFI, we're continuing to love Israel, to defend Israel, to speak the truth. We do a lot of research and work to try and get to the truth, because unfortunately we can't rely on the media. We can't even rely on established international communities like the UN to speak the truth, because they are deceived, and we need to fight back and to reveal truth to people. And so that's what we're doing.
We'll keep up the good work.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for listening, everyone, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.